For over 2 decades, Vladimir Putin has ruled Russia with an iron grip. He has crushed every challenger, silenced critics, and built an empire of intelligence agencies, spies, and private militias to protect his power. But in June 2023, something unthinkable happened. An army marched towards Moscow, not from an enemy country, but from within Russia itself.
The past 48 hours have shaken Russia and really confused much of the world. The news still breaking overnight after that military mutiny by Russia's Wagner Group mercenaries. Those forces were 120 miles south of Moscow yesterday, apparently ready to strike the Russian capital, when suddenly their leader called it off.
A rebellion had begun. Was this the moment Putin's empire would finally crumble? Or was it doomed from the start? Let's break down why overthrowing Putin is nearly impossible and what it would actually take to remove him from power. For 23 years, Vladimir Putin has survived wars, sanctions, and global isolation. Every attempt to challenge his rule has ended in failure. But on June 24, 2023, Russia's capital braced for war. A military convoy armed with tanks and anti-aircraft weapons was speeding towards Moscow. The streets were eerily quiet except for the distant sound of helicopters circling the Kremlin. Who was attacking Russia? Not NATO, not Ukraine. The biggest threat to Putin's rule wasn't coming from the West. It was coming from one of his closest allies. In just a few hours, the unthinkable happened. Putin's iron grip on power looked weaker than ever. But then, the coup collapsed. No battle, no war, just silence. How did it fall apart so quickly? And more importantly, why is it nearly impossible to overthrow Vladimir Putin? To understand why Putin's empire is so hard to crack, we have to look at how he built it. For centuries, Russian rulers feared one thing above all else: being overthrown. From the Tsars to the Soviets, history is filled with Russian leaders who were betrayed by their own people. Tsar Nicholas II, executed by his own citizens after the Russian Revolution. Joseph Stalin, paranoid of assassination, surrounded by body doubles. Nikita Khrushchev, removed from power by his own party in a silent coup. The message was clear: no Russian leader is ever truly safe. The Soviet Union perfected the art of control, creating the KGB, a massive spy network with hundreds of thousands of agents, monitoring not just civilians, but government officials, military leaders, and even their own spies. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, and with it, the KGB fell apart. For a brief moment, Russia had a chance at democracy. Then came Vladimir Putin, a former KGB officer turned politician. He watched the fall of the Soviet Union and vowed never to let it happen again. From the moment he took power, his mission was clear: build an empire where no one could challenge him. But how did he do it? And why does his system make him nearly impossible to remove? Let's break it down. Step 1. Seizing the FSB, Russia's new KGB. After the Soviet collapse, Russia's intelligence agencies were in chaos. Putin rose through the ranks at lightning speed. In 1998, he was appointed head of the FSB, the modern-day KGB. In 1999, he became prime minister. In 2000, he was suddenly president of Russia. In just 2 years, Putin took over the very agencies that once ruled the Soviet Union. And his first move? Turned the FSB into his personal weapon. Step 2. Eliminating the oligarchs. After the fall of the Soviet Union, Russia's economy was ruled by billionaires. These oligarchs controlled everything: banks, oil, media, and even the government itself. But Putin gave them 2 choices: pledge loyalty or be destroyed. Mikhail Khodorkovsky, one of Russia's richest men, refused to bow to Putin. He was arrested, his company was seized, and he spent 10 years in prison. Boris Berezovsky, another powerful oligarch, exiled himself to London. He later died mysteriously in what many believes was an FSB assassination. Oligarchs who survived, they stayed rich and powerful, but only because they followed Putin's orders. The message was clear: Russia's billionaires worked for Putin now. Step 3. Controlling the military and police. Putin didn't stop at the FSB. He consolidated power over every security force in Russia. The military strengthened. The Interior Ministry, MVD, reinforced. The police brought under his influence. But his most most brilliant move? He forced all these groups to spy on each other. The FSB watches the military monitors political leaders, and even the FSB spies on its own agents. This divide and rule strategy ensures that no one in Russia can unite against him. For over 2 decades, Putin's system worked, until one man broke the rules. June 23, 2023. Wagner marches on Moscow. For years, Putin had an army he could deny ever existed, a private militia known as Wagner. Officially, Wagner wasn't a part of the Russian military. It operated in the shadows, doing the jobs the Kremlin couldn't afford to be linked to. War crimes, secret battles, and brutal mercenary warfare across Ukraine, Syria, and Africa. At the head of it was Yevgeny Prigozhin, once a low-level criminal, then a caterer for the Kremlin, then he was Putin's most feared warlord. For years, Prigozhin and Putin had a mutually beneficial relationship. Putin needed a ruthless enforcer who could operate without international scrutiny. Prigozhin needed money, power, and the Kremlin's blessing to expand Wagner into a global empire. But in 2023, everything changed. The war in Ukraine was going badly for Russia. Casualties were piling up, equipment shortages were crippling Russian forces, and Wagner, once Putin's most reliable attack dogs, were being bled dry in brutal battles. Prigozhin blamed one group for the failures: the Russian military leadership. He accused Russia's defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, and chief of the general staff, Valery Gerasimov, of incompetence and corruption. At first, his criticism was loud but indirect. But then it escalated. On June 23, 2023, Prigozhin crossed a line no Russian commander had dared to cross. He openly defied the Kremlin. Wagner forces stormed a Russian military base in Rostov-on-Don, a critical command center for the war in Ukraine. They seized the headquarters without firing a shot, as Russian soldiers stood down without resisting. Then Prigozhin made his move. After securing Rostov, Wagner's forces mobilized a full-scale march toward Moscow. 25,000 battle-hardened Wagner fighters were moving at full speed. Armored vehicles rolled down highways toward Russia's capital. Anti-aircraft systems were deployed to defend the convoy. And then something shocking happened. The Russian military, Putin's ultimate weapon, barely reacted. Helicopters scrambled but never fired. Military checkpoints were abandoned. Russian soldiers stood back, letting Wagner pass. Russia's most heavily defended city was suddenly wide open. Putin's entire security structure, his fortress of power, was frozen. Why? Because nobody knew whose side they were supposed to be on. Some believed Prigozhin wasn't targeting Putin, just his top generals. Some in the Russian army agreed with Wagner's frustration over how the war was being handled. And some in Putin's own government were waiting to see who would win before choosing a side. Moscow braced for impact. Was this the end of Putin's rule? And then, suddenly, it all collapsed. In the final moments before Wagner could reach Moscow, something unexpected happens. Prigozhin ordered his troops to stop. No battle, no coup, just silence. A deal had been made. Prigozhin agreed to stand down. His troops withdrew from Moscow. He was exiled to Belarus. But why? At the time, the details were murky. Some reports suggested Putin personally negotiated the deal. Others claimed that Prigozhin realized he didn't have the full support of the Russian military. But one thing was clear: this wasn't over. Putin had survived, but his invincibility had been shattered. For the first time in 23 years, his rule had been directly challenged, and his forces hesitated. Wagner's rebellion lasted just 24 hours, but the consequences would last much, much longer. Some Russian generals refused to stop Wagner. Were they waiting to see who would win? Some FSB agents knew about the coup, but said nothing. Putin's fortress of power cracked, but didn't break. But what happened to Prigozhin? At first, Putin allowed him to live. Then, on August 23rd, 2023, exactly 2 months after the coup, Prigozhin's private jet mysteriously crashed. Everyone on board, including Wagner's top commanders, was killed. U.S. intelligence confirmed it was no accident. Prigozhin had been assassinated. Russia denied involvement, but few believed it. For Putin, the message was clear: if you betray me, you will not live long enough to regret it. Wagner, once Putin's greatest tool was dismantled. Some fighters were absorbed into Russia's military, others disappeared or fled abroad. The coup attempt had failed, but the damage, it was already done. For the first time in decades, Putin's grip on power wasn't absolute. His military hesitated. His intelligence agencies failed to stop the rebellion. His invincibility is no longer guaranteed. The coup wasn't just about Prigozhin. It exposed the cracks in Putin's regime. And while he survived this challenge, the next one may not be so easy to stop. How much loyalty does the Russian military truly have left? What happens if another leader rises, one who doesn't stop at Moscow's gates? Is Putin truly untouchable, or is his time running out? The world is watching, and history is waiting. Putin has survived every challenge so far, but history has proven no leader rules forever. The question is not if Putin will face another coup, it's when, and who will be bold enough to try again. Want to know how dictators actually fall? Click here for our deep dive into another shocking power struggle, because Putin isn't the first leader to face a rebellion, and he won't be the last.